All right, so today we're going to be taking a look at some legal documents all about bankruptcy proceedings in Spain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these are from the Spanish firm,
Okay.
MCHMAbogados, that specializes in this kind of law.
Interesting.
So I thought it would be really interesting to kind of take a deep dive and see, how they determine who gets paid back first when someone goes bankrupt.
I'm in. Let's do it.
Yeah, because it's not always as simple as you might think.
I bet.
Like just first come, first served or something like that.
Right. Yeah, you would think it would be more straightforward.
Right.
But I have a feeling it's not.
Definitely not. And one of the first things that jumped out at me was this term creditors concursales,
Okay.
which refers specifically to debts that were incurred before bankruptcy is declared.
Oh, interesting.
So they seem to make a real clear distinction between those and debts that come up after, the declaration.
It makes sense that they would want to separate those out. Because, it's a pretty important distinction when you think about, who gets paid back first.
Yeah.
It's almost like, you're trying to keep a ship afloat while you're also, trying to figure out who to pay back.
Yeah.
So those debts that come up, after the bankruptcy declaration to kind of keep things running, those actually take top priority.
Oh, okay.
But those bankruptcy debts, as we're calling them.
Right.
The ones incurred before things get really complicated.
Okay, so then they talk about three main categories for these bankruptcy debts.
Okay.
Privileged, ordinary, and subordinated.
It's like a ranking system,
Yeah, almost.
and it's clear that being at the top is going to be much better for you.
Yeah. So let's start with these privileged debts.
Sure.
What makes them so special?
Well, they definitely get some special treatment, let's say that.
Okay.
And just to complicate things even further,
Yeah.
even within that privilege category, there are two levels:
Oh, boy.
special privilege and general privilege.
Wow.
So it gets even more granular in terms of just how much priority a certain debt gets.
So what kind of debts get this top tier, special privilege?
So let's say you have a mortgage on a property. Well, that lender would hold a special privilege debt,
Okay.
meaning that they would have a direct claim on that asset,
Oh.
which is your house in this case.
like a secured loan?
Exactly. That's why they're often called that.
Okay.
So basically, they're first in line if things go south.
All right, that makes sense. But what about these general privilege debts?
Oh.
What bumps them up a notch?
So these are usually unsecured debts,
Mm-hmm.
meaning they're not tied to a specific asset,
Right.
but they're considered essential,
Okay.
either socially or economically.
Okay.
Things like unpaid wages, for example.
Gotcha.
Those fall into this category.
So even though there's no, house or car on the line,
Right.
they still get paid before other debts.
Exactly.
Wow.
The law is basically trying to protect certain groups,
Yeah.
like employees or the government collecting taxes.
Interesting.
It's just a way to make sure these critical needs are met, even when a company goes bankrupt.
But it's like they're trying to keep things fair, even in this chaotic situation.
Right, exactly.
So what about these ordinary debts?
Okay.
What makes them just ordinary?
Well, these are kind of, the most common types of debts that you see.
Uh-huh.
They don't have any special privileges or anything like that.
Okay.
They're not secured by a specific asset or considered essential like those general privilege debts.
Right, right. So I guess for the average lender, it seems like you really need to know where your debt falls on this list.
Yeah, absolutely.
If things go bad, you're not at the front of the line.
Exactly. And, that's why it's so important to really do your research.
Yeah.
Especially when you're, doing business in Spain.
Okay.
You have to assess not just the financial health of the borrower,
Right.
but also the type of debt you're offering and where it sits, in this whole bankruptcy hierarchy.
Yeah. So it's not just about how much is owed,
Nope.
it's about the nature of the debt itself.
Exactly.
Okay, so then we come to the bottom of the pyramid here with these subordinated debts.
Right.
What puts a debt in this category?
Well, sometimes it's a matter of timing,
Okay.
Like if a claim is filed late, it might end up as subordinated debt.
Oh, interesting.
And sometimes it's just the nature of the debt itself.
Okay.
Things like fines or penalties.
Gotcha. And this is also where, those loans from people connected to the debtor would end up, right?
You got it.
Like family members or business partners.
That's right.
They're trying to make sure
Exactly.
no one's getting special treatment.
Yeah, they want to make sure that people aren't jumping ahead of other creditors.
Right.
Just because they have, a personal or business relationship with the person going bankrupt.
It's about keeping it fair for everybody.
Right. It's all about that level playing field.
Okay, so now that we have these three main categories, privileged, ordinary, subordinated. Let's walk through how the actual repayment process works.
Okay.
What happens first?
So remember, it all starts with those debts incurred after the bankruptcy declaration.
Right.
The ones to keep essential operations running.
Right, to keep the lights on.
Exactly.
Those are paid first, right?
Exactly. They call those creditors contra la masa,
Okay.
which basically means debts against the estate.
Interesting.
It's like recognizing that those debts are helping to keep things going during the proceedings.
Okay, so after those, what's next?
Okay, so next up we have these special privilege debts.
Okay, the VIPs?
Exactly. And since they're often backed by specific assets,
Right.
they actually get repaid directly from the sale of those assets.
Oh, so like if a property is sold, the mortgage lender gets paid first from that money.
Exactly. They get their slice of the pie first.
Interesting. Okay, so who comes after them?
Then it's the general privilege debts. You know, those unsecured but essential ones.
Right.
So things like unpaid wages and certain taxes would fall in this category.
So employees and tax authorities are kind of getting preferential treatment here.
Well, in a way, yeah.
Which I guess makes sense. They play a big role
It does.
in the economy.
Yeah.
But where do those ordinary creditors fall in all of this?
They only get paid after all of those privilege debts are taken care of,
Oh, wow.
both special and general.
Okay, so that's a big point for lenders to understand then.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a real chance they might not get all their money back.
Right, and that's where, understanding the risk comes in.
Yeah.
And of course, last in line are those subordinated debts.
Yep, the bottom of the barrel.
Exactly. They only get paid if there's anything left over.
Wow, that's risky.
It is.
So it seems like this whole system is really focused on, keeping things stable and making sure the most important debts are covered first.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
But it also, shows how important it is to understand the risks involved.
Absolutely.
Especially when you're dealing with something like Spanish bankruptcy law.
Now, earlier we talked about ordinary creditors having voting rights in these proceedings.
Right.
What does that look like in practice?
So even though they're not, first in line to get paid back, they still get a say in things. They can vote on things like restructuring plans or even whether to liquidate the company.
So they can actually try to influence the outcome?
Exactly.
Even though it might not be in their favor?
Right.
It's almost like a poker game,
I like that analogy.
where even if you don't have the best hand,
Right.
you can still try to play your cards.
Yeah, you have to be strategic about it.
So do you think these voting rights actually give ordinary creditors any real power?
That's a good question. And, I think it really depends
Okay.
on the specific case. The number of creditors, the types of debts involved,
Right.
and, just the overall financial health of the debtor.
So the power dynamics can really shift.
They can, yeah.
It seems like there's a lot more going on than just the law itself.
There is. You really need to understand all the behind-the-scenes stuff, too.
Absolutely. And that's why, having expert advice is so important.
Yeah.
It's not just about knowing the rules of the game. It's about knowing how to play it.
Well, you've certainly given us a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
It's been really interesting to learn about how Spanish bankruptcy law handles this whole debt repayment issue.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area.
And as you said, having expert advice is key in these situations.
Absolutely. It can make all the difference.
It's really fascinating. And, we've been talking about how Spain does things, but it makes me wonder how different it is in other countries.
Yeah, it's something I get asked about a lot, actually.
Really?
Yeah, what might be considered a, privileged debt in Spain might not be treated the same way in, say, the U.S.
Oh, right. Yeah.
or Japan or anywhere else, really.
It makes you think about how different countries, balance those interests.
Right.
Between protecting creditors, keeping the economy stable,
Yeah.
and making sure it's fair for people who are struggling financially.
Absolutely. And I think it shows that there's not really, a one-size-fits-all solution to bankruptcy.
No, definitely not.
Each system reflects, the priorities of that specific country.
That's a good point.
And those differences can have a huge impact on anyone doing business internationally.
Yeah, I bet.
Imagine, trying to handle a bankruptcy case that spans multiple countries.
Oh, gosh.
You'd have to deal with all sorts of conflicting legal systems.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It can be.
So for our listener, the one who sent us these documents,
Yeah.
what's the most important thing they should remember as they learn more about this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that you really need to understand the different types of debt and how they're prioritized.
Yeah, that makes sense because like we've been saying, it's not just about how much money is owed,
Right.
It's about where that debt falls in the whole system.
Exactly. And in Spain, that system is, specifically designed to protect certain people and keep things orderly.
Well, we've definitely uncovered a ton of information about this today.
Oh, yeah.
Spanish bankruptcy law is a pretty complex beast.
It is, but it's super interesting to dive into.
Before we go, I want to leave our listener with something to think about.
Okay.
We've seen how Spain does things, but think about your own country.
Okay.
How might a business owner prepare differently for bankruptcy there?
Yeah.
It's interesting to compare,
It is.
see how different legal systems handle this kind of thing.
It reminds us that we can always, learn from each other.
Well, that's a great note to end on.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course. Anytime.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep learning.